Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of the Bub Report. I am your humble host, Dr. Kellon Bub. Now, before we get on with today's program, I just want to take this opportunity to wish all the fathers of the nation, including the guests who will be joining us this week, a happy Father's Day. Of course, today is a day for fathers. It is not a day to talk about mothers who play the role of fathers or to put down fathers or anything like that. It is to celebrate the fathers who are playing that very important responsibility of that male father figure in the household that we have all come to rely on as a society. Now, last week's reports from some quarters of financial impropriety and conflicts of interest emanating from the board of the Grenada National Lotteries Authority has given us pause and has caused us to reflect on the pervasive culture of nepotism, cronyism, and favoritism in the governance process. Now, these allegations bring to the fore how the absence of corruption as a factor in the rule of law can allow it to run awry without any proper checks and balances to stem its influence. Now, during the last election campaign, Prime Minister Deacon Mitchell committed to a clean break from the culture of nepotism by hiring the best and most qualified people to serve on government boards and other quasi-state entities. In fact, he made the very strong case that every qualified Grenadian citizen, irrespective of their political bias, should be given that honorable responsibility to serve their country. One can surmise, however, that this promise did not pan out as was articulated. And like the previous administration, the practice of hiring politically connected surrogates and allies is par for the course in the governance structure of developing countries like Grenada. Now, a recent report by the independent group, the World Justice Project, revealed that a majority of people in the Caribbean believe that public officials are corrupt, and that corruption in the Corruption in the Caribbean survey that they conducted in 2022. The nonprofit organization, which also included survey participants from Grenada, found that on average, 80% of respondents in the region believe that public officials frequently award government contracts to friends or relatives, and 66% believe that public officials regularly request bribes. Now, the report also articulated that attitude towards corrupt practices are often mixed depending on the practice at hand. Of the scenarios involving public officials, the most acceptable corrupt practices, according to respondents, was recruiting a public officer on the basis of family ties and friendship networks, with 15% of respondents on average believing this is an acceptable practice. This is what I found interesting about how people perceive this issue. Now, regionally, embezzlement was the least condoned public sector scenario, as only 9% of respondents on average say that an elected official taking public funds and using them for their private use is an acceptable practice. On average, 66% of respondents believed that all or most people working in political parties are engaged in corrupt practices, and 55% believe the same amount of members of the same amount for members of their national parliaments. That is, now perceptions of involvement in corrupt practices are lowest for public school teachers at 18%, doctors and nurses in public hospitals at 20%, and this is what I found interesting: land registry officers at 28%. Now, apart from this report, Transparency International have found that corruption in the Caribbean has shown no improvement over the last decade on the Corruption Perception Index. Barbados dropped from 76 in 2012 to 65 in 2022. The Bahamas from 71 to 64, and St. Lucia from 71 to 55. Grenada went up 1 point from 52 in 2022 and now stands at 53. Now, we will be posting the link to the full report in the comments section so that those who are avid readers amongst us can have an opportunity to peruse the survey. Now, it does in fact make for good reading. And again, as I said, we wish to take this time to wish all fathers of the nation a happy Father's Day. And folks, for the first segment of the program, we are going to be speaking with Grenada's Minister of Education, in which we had a conversation earlier this week about the decision by the government of Grenada to raise the compulsory age of education to 17. This is the Bub Report. Please remember to like and share this week's live stream. We'll be right back for the first segment after this quick break. Please stand by.
Don't go there.
You are a technocrat. I mean, you can speak to whether or not it was appropriate or inappropriate for that to occur. Would you have done that as a permanent secretary?
Politicians get the information from wherever source that they can.
That's going to be the extent of your answer.
Yeah.
Don't go there.
There's a lot of noise around the data protection bill that, in my respectful view, is not warranted.
I was one of those making noise, and it's simply because I was concerned about that specific section 33.
Don't go there.
Are you going to be offering yourself up as political leader of the party?
I see you've called me have a much more than diplomatic passport. I don't mind that.
Don't go there.
What is the relationship like between you and your leader, Dr. Mitchell, your boss, Dr. Mitchell?
I'm not sure how to explain how to answer this question at this time. I prefer not to answer.
Don't go there.
They said that you approached the bank for the loan before the election and that it only materialized after the election. There are also conflicting reports around the quantity of monies that were received. What is the reality here?
People try to extort the truth and to make all kinds of things about it. I just stay quiet. So if you notice, I was really and truly quiet about the whole matter.
Except with not with the New Today newspaper. The New Today newspaper reported on this. So I'm not sure you were quiet on this. Go ahead, Honorable. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just trying to answer your question, right?
Don't go there.
I think we just spoke at length about the regularization framework. So
yes, we did. But let us talk, Prime Minister. Let us talk about the workers who are dismissed.
The Bub Report. We go there.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the first segment of the program. Now, formal education within the English-speaking Caribbean can be traced back to the establishment of the Codrington Grammar School in Barbados in 1743. Now, after more than 2 centuries of oppressive British colonial rule, the educational systems within CARICOM states continue to reflect the academic traditions of their former colonizer. Now, prior to emancipation in 1838, the notion of providing education for enslaved Africans met strong opposition from the human smuggling plantation captors, despite the efforts of many Christian missionaries seeking to provide religious education to convert enslaved Africans to Christianity. During the post-emancipation period, the education of ex-enslaved Africans within the colonized space of the Caribbean became one of the central issues of the day. Religious groups, some of whom also benefited from the enslavement of Africans, together with financial support from the British government and the Negro Education Grant, drove and shaped the development of education at all levels of Caribbean society. It was, however, not until the attainment of political independence in the formerly colonized British Caribbean that compulsory access to secondary education was made available for all students, despite their socioeconomic status. In Grenada, like some other English-speaking Caribbean territories, voluntary schooling begins at age 2, with compulsory schooling beginning at 5. Children complete compulsory education at age 16, and they have the option of matriculating at the TMI Community College or at other private institutions. Or they also have the option of opting out of the formal education system altogether by seeking employment elsewhere. Now, this is all about to change, as the administration in St. George's just piloted legislation to increase the compulsory school age from 16 to 17 as of the new school year in September 2024. Prime Minister Deacon Mitchell, as well as his compatriot, Minister of Education David Andrews, in their contribution to the debate on the legislative change, said the amendment is part of their administration's thrust to reimagine education in Grenada. And Grenada will join Barbados, who in October of last year also proposed that all children be allowed to continue school until age 18. Dr. Ideme Denny in Barbados said that the Ministry of Education there also recognized that there are some children who would need more teaching time because they would not have achieved what most others have, owing to the level of attainment by the age of 16. Now, here to make sense of these changes is Grenada's Education Minister, Senator the Honorable David Andrew, who is also making his inaugural appearance on the Bub Report. Minister, welcome to this week's edition of the Bub Report, and it's a pleasure to have you here, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Bob. It's a pleasure to be on the Bub Report. It's notwithstanding my inaugural appearance, I look forward to other engagements as developments unfold in the education sector.
Yes, absolutely, and this is a significant development, and the way that it was framed to me was it really gave me pause in respect of what happens to our students after they complete secondary school, because I suppose I was always under the impression that once you finish secondary school, everyone automatically goes to the T.A. Barisha Community College, but that's not the case.
Certainly it isn't, and in fact that was one of the driving factors that pushed us into that direction, because we wanted to make sure as a government, as a state, we had the opportunity to drill skills and further education into the entire population of students till they're 18. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. So let us first and foremost talk about the logic behind raising the compulsory school graduation age. You just articulated here one of the justifications for doing so. But in looking at the current infrastructure of education, when the student gets to Form 5 and when that student graduates, what are they missing in respect of the matriculation into early adulthood?
So Kellen, before I even answer that question as to what they're missing, I want to make it clear what the legislation is.
Yes.
Yeah. So the Education Amendment Bill seeks to change the definition of compulsory school age from 5 to 16 inclusive to 5 to 17 inclusive. What that means is that they will be in school till 18.
Okay.
Right? So they will be in school all till 17 until they get to the 18th birthday, on which time they become an adult. Then they will be obligated to remain in school. So that's what the Act seeks to address. Now, as it is, at the age of 16, the government, a parent, the Ministry of Education, none of these agents have any legal authorization to prevent a child from leaving school. So a child at 16, whether he completes secondary school or not, once he attains the age of 16 by the current Education Act, that child can, in fact, I lost you there for a bit, Kellon?
No. Go ahead. You may see me going off screen for a bit, but I'm here. Yes.
That's fine. So that child, once the child attains 16 years, can leave school. Even if that child is in 3rd form or 4th form, even before they get to 5th form, once they attain the age of 16 with the current Education Act, they can leave school and try to enter the world of work, or try to make other means of their lives. And that for me is a serious challenge. And to get back to your question, you asked what exactly are those students missing? So from our observation and from our experience, and even before I get to numbers to share with you, we found that there are several young persons, usually between the ages 16 to 19, that you find disengaged, unemployed, and in their words, they're looking for work. They are actually looking for employment in some cases, but they don't have the right skill sets, they don't have the right attitudes, they don't have the right approach. They're not employable, and the world of work complains about that too. So we want to make sure that we don't give them the opportunity to before getting fully skilled to stay in school. So they're missing employability skills. They're missing that opportunity to have work-related skills that will make them more marketable and a better fit for the world of work. So we are seeing this extension in the compulsory school age as an opportunity to further skill and to give them opportunities to become more work ready.
I see. Okay, now let us talk about, again, you say that work ready. What does the data say right now in respect of students who, let's say they graduate in Form 5 in the respective high schools? How much of those students are absorbed, say, by the TMI Community College, or who go on to seek private sector education opportunities, say at the St. George University, or who travel? What does the data say about that?
Right. So I could give some bit of the data in that regard. So
Yes.
on an average, within the last 10 years, from 2013 to 2023, we can get the average of, there's an average of over 1,600 students who graduate from secondary schools.
Yes.
On an average. Some years it's a little more, some years it may be a little less for various factors, who may travel, who may migrate, and those factors. Generally, we can see that there's an average from TAMCC within the last 4 or so 5 years. We can see an average of about 800 trending towards 1,000 persons being absorbed in TAMCC, and specifically because we have introduced free tuition too, and so we've seen uptake, stronger enrollment at TAMCC and at New
Okay.
But within the age group that we have under review, between 16 to 18, within the last 4 to 5 years, we have seen an average of about 800 students going on to TAMCC on average. Some years, and in recent years, it's been more. But the average is about 800. So we're talking about, of the 1,600, 800 go on to TAMCC on an average.
Just about half of those students.
Go on to TAMCC. You have probably another 200, and in recent, again, we have not had all the data for NULO before. Now, NULO has had a remarkable journey within the last 10 years. And within the last, I know the enrollment has doubled within the last year, within the last 2 years, given our new free tuition policy. So, but the average here is close to 200, but I'm sure it's, the last couple of years would reflect about 400 plus, right?
Right.
But we're still working with the average. So I'm saying within the last 4 years, 5 years, there's been an average of 200 persons, let's say. So you're talking about 8 and 2, 1,000 of those students are accounted for. You may find a trickle going off to St. George's University. Some migrate to other universities elsewhere. So generally,
and really, that is for those who can afford, right? So in other words, there still is a need to absorb that shortfall, that remaining pool of students who are not really, they're not going to TAMCC, they're not going to NULO, and so therefore that there is something that needs to happen there. Okay, all right.
Correct. And so you're talking about probably a 400 to 600 pool of students that we have to every year look for, try to engage, try to find meaningful engagement for. And I want to posit that previous governments have struggled with that very issue to the extent that they've tried to put together many different kinds of programs. Programs like the Imani and some of the other GET from former NDC administrations, that one, and the Imani from the previous government.
Administration, yes.
Yes, some of those have been born out of the very need to address this issue. But we recognize that we recognize that this is a systemic issue. And if we continue to have all these programs, we will still be needing to implement several programs, and the source of the problems are not being addressed. So we've moved to adjust the mandatory school age so that we will stem the flow of these students that are not engaged, not well tooled, not well skilled, and ensure that they're given these additional 2 years to remain in school and get skilled.
Now let us talk about curriculum. Now, how will the current curriculum be adjusted to accommodate that longer high school tenure? And in respect of what the grading process would look like, because right now we have Form 1 to Form 5, right, which accommodates those that gets to 16. But what would that look like?
So let me just adjust your suggestion, because you seem to think that there is going to be an extended period of time at the secondary level, and that's not the case. This legislation is just ensuring that they have to remain in a formal school setting. That setting could be secondary school, it can be TAMCC, it can be NULO, it can be St. George's University, it can be some other university, or it can be some NTA approved skill service provider. It does not imply staying additional years at the secondary level. So there's nothing that's going to change really at the secondary level. This legislation is simply to ensure that the onus remains on parents to keep their children in some form of education till they're 18. And the natural matriculation is to go on to TAMCC or NULO or St. George's University or some other foreign university or wherever they choose to go on in a formal setting. Or we are also engaging other skill service providers to assist in absorbing the entire population of students. So it's not about secondary school. So there's not going to be many changes in the curriculum per se at the secondary level at this point.
Okay.
I mean, and I'm saying it at this point because ultimately there will be changes in the curriculum to mainstream skills, because all that we are doing is part of a bigger plan. We have a national skills policy and a skills strategy. The skills policy was born out of immense consultations with all of the key players, the Ministry of Labor, the unions, the National Training Agency, NULO and TAMCC, who are traditional skill service providers and education systems. And with help from the United Nations, we were able to develop the national skills policy and a strategy to see us get there. That was approved by the cabinet over a year ago. And we have been systematically implementing elements of that. And so this amendment to the school age, the compulsory school age, is just part of that, you know, because and then there are other things like building centers of excellence and mainstreaming skills in schools. When it gets to that point, we'd have to determine what changes we make to the curriculum in a more specific way, because the reality is the education system as it is cannot properly skill our students. Why do I say that? Skills education is competency based. It's about can-do skills. What competencies do the technical students really have? But we have a system where in most schools, people have a double period of 2 40-minute sessions to do practicals for those subjects. The reality is that won't get you to be as skilled as you need to be. So even if you do that successfully over 2 years and you pass the CAPE or whatever it is, when you go to the world of work, you can have a situation like has happened, where many of the employers will say, I need more competence from these people. I need them to be less theoretical and more
as opposed to just a certification, right? And we come from that colonial culture, and it is a colonial culture where, you know, I got 20 subjects, but what skills do you have with those 20 subjects? Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So
okay.
Ultimately, there will be some changes there, but not at this point necessarily.
So what I hear you saying here is that when the students get to Form 5, they still have that option of graduating from that particular high school. Yes. But that following that graduation, there still is a requirement on their part to be able to seek out those other educational opportunities, whether by way of NULO. You said those centers of excellence. Let us talk about, sir, because we know that NULO is doing amazing work in respect of absorbing a lot of those students and doling out a lot of those technical skills that students have. But what would those centers of excellence look like? Where would they be? How would that process be rolled out in time for the implementation in September?
Right. So mentioning centers of excellence, we are not going to have all of them ready for September. Now,
okay,
they are There are some we've identified, over about 10 areas that we have identified. We are currently negotiating with some schools. We want to convert a few schools to make them skill centers. So that is being worked on in the more medium term. More immediately, we do not need necessarily to have new centers of excellence to absorb the students. If we have continued intake with NULO, continued intake with TAMCC, we already have several certified providers with the National Training Agency who offer technical skills, and we are currently engaging a number of them. So, I mean, on the top of my head, I can call, there are those in administrative work like Grace Typing School. There are those coming on board to do music and to take them up to the Royal School of Music level, along with CSEC Cape Music. There are those that are doing apiculture and fish technology. So and those are certified. These programs are certified by the NTA. And so we are currently enlisting those people. There's Labukan Creative
Center.
Yeah. So there are all of these different industries that we are engaging as a ministry right now, compiling a list. So we will work with them to make sure they have the facility, I know they have the program, and I know they have some measure of facility. But when we do the final assessment in terms of the numbers, we'll be able to determine how all of these fit, where the students go. But we are currently working with them, and we are confident that those agencies, those divisions will be able to absorb the students for this first outroll of this new mandatory and compulsory age policy.
Yeah, now let us talk about, because again, you articulated earlier the role of programs like Imani, the role of TVET that we had earlier and things like that. What will happen with those programs? Is there an intention to eventually phase those programs out, or what will happen to those programs now that you're saying that, you know, these particular centers of excellence that we have in Grenada will be absorbing those students? Obviously, I do not know that the Imani program only absorbs students within that 16 to 18 age range. But what will happen to programs like the Imani program? Will there a reimagining? Probably, maybe I should not have said phased out. But would there be a reimagining of what that would look like now that we have compulsory education going up to a later stage in life?
Certainly, I mean, I am not the minister for youth, so I'm probably not the best person to speak with authority on the matter. But I could say I could see it certainly will impact. Now, we are targeting this age group to make sure that we stem the strong flow of persons without skill into programs like those. So that if we stem the flow of persons leaving the system without, then programs like the Imani can better serve in the capacity that they were meant to serve it, as a form of internship training to get you. And we have persons who have already passed the age that we cannot mandate to come back to school at this point.
Right.
So the program will still be useful for several of those persons who are still young, who, although they can't get back in school, may benefit from several of the programs there. But that's for the Minister of Youth to talk about. But I could only see how the correlation between what we are doing here in education in relation to skills could impact programs like that. But for me, it's all positive.
Yeah. Well, when you speak to your colleague, the Minister of Youth, let him know that we have been trying to invite him to the Bub Report. You know, we are fair to everyone. He's my good friend. You know, he knows me very well. Senator the Honorable Jonathan Lecret, I'm speaking to you, sir. But so let us talk about, because again, Minister, you know, I get very excited. I'm very excited about this topic because as an educator myself, in respect of skills, I think, you know, having those skills are so critical. And again, employers, as you said, are looking for those skills. Those are the conversations that we have at my institution as well. How do we equip our students to go there being not only theoretically well-rounded and academically inclined, right? But how are they equipped with those 21st century skills that we need? So let us talk, Minister, about those particular skills that you believe the government should be prioritizing, that the society needs at this point. Is that something that you've thought about in respect of this change?
Oh, yes, it's something that we have thought about and we are actively pursuing. The skills policy, which I alluded to earlier, and strategy.
Yes.
They've mapped out a number of areas that will make our young people a lot more work ready. So we're talking things like furniture making. People in that industry will tell you there is a serious shortage of youth coming into that area and technical competence. The people in construction, all of the major construction companies, literally, they've been asking us to do a construction school. So it's something that we've been actively considering. Because of the shortage, many of the major projects in Grenada, they get stalled, and the contractors will tell you they get stalled because there's a difficulty finding reliable employees, of the younger set. And that's a challenge that we need to address. But we can't deny the issue of technologies. So one of the centers of excellence we're talking about is one for technologies. So while we've introduced coding, for instance, in schools, and we have launched technology clubs in schools to feature things like drone technology and coding and robotics and all of those things in schools, we want to have a dedicated center of excellence because we have a lot going on. The world is becoming a global space, and the opportunities for even things like cybersecurity and some of those areas. So a center of excellence for that. Then we also have things like fishing. There is part of the plan, a center of excellence earmarked for developing marine studies in one of our campuses, right? That's in Carriacou. There's the plan to do that. It's embryonic at the moment still, but it's in the document, and it's one of the things because we find fishing is a significant part of the Grenadian economy, but we want people to do so from a place where they are well trained. They can see it as a business. They understand how to manage it, boat repair. So you're mixing all the traditions in there as well, but it takes care of that cultural heritage part and the economics of it as well. And then we have agriculture, Center of Excellence for Agriculture. Agriculture is a key part. So the Maribor Farm School is also part of that. So we have sports. We don't have a dedicated sporting school. So there are a number of areas within the policy. Now we cannot do all at the same time. So at the moment, we are currently working with, there's a furniture, the national, I'm not sure I'm getting the name correct, but they produce furniture in Snell Hall, and it was an institution that was born from under the former administration. But we think there's a lot more potential to do more there, to teach there, because the training component has never started in that facility. So we are working to upgrade it, and that's a low-hanging fruit that we can actually make into a center of excellence that it is. This very setup that I'm using was made there. The desk and all that. So they do wonderful work, but the teaching component has never started. So we see that as a low-hanging fruit that we can engage, put in the AutoCAD, put in the computer lab to be able to teach effectively while you do the practicals there too. So all of those are envisaged, and it's just that we are going to flesh them out bit by bit. We can't just do all of it all at once. So we kind of doing it systematically and step by step.
Right, a phased approach there. Two final questions, Minister. Now, your colleague, well, she's also your MP. That's Emmeline Pear. I'm sure somebody you know very well. She expressed concern in her contribution to the debate, not wanting to oppose. In fact, they indicated that they welcome the change, which, by the way, incidentally, would also adjust legislatively adjust the Employment Act, which we can speak about as well. But she expressed concern that no consultations were held with the relevant stakeholders and partners in education or in society in respect of this change. That it just came out of nowhere. Is there a reason why there was no consultation held, or perhaps there was consultation held and we were not informed about it as the national community, only to hear it in Parliament?
Well, the truth is, the very document of which that's a part, the National TVET Strategy and Policy, there was strong consultation. That is an element of that document, which was consulted upon significantly by all of the stakeholders, including NTA, GNAB, and Chamber of Commerce, and all of those entities. So that was part of the document. And the document was only approved after the consultation, and it got to cabinet after all of that. It was finalized. So there was an element of consultation in the preparation of the document, and this element is one of the pullouts from that document, which was approved since last year. Since we got into office, we were talking about enacting that. So it's not a new statement. It's not come out of the hat, but I could appreciate if when we go into implement it, and we do have a plan to do that, we need to engage students just to look at the nuances that we may need to adjust in its implementation. But I can't agree that there was no consultation, because the very document from which it was taken was a document that was extensively consulted upon with all of the stakeholders, the Chamber of Commerce, the NTA, and the schools themselves.
So the teachers were also part of this process as well, is what you're saying? The Union of Teachers? I
would have to check to make sure, but the Chamber of Commerce was there.
Okay.
I think probably, yeah. So most likely they would have been a part of that too, because at that level, the umbrella bodies are often engaged. So, yeah.
Okay, all right.
But I want to point out too, though, that it's not we're not asking teachers to do anything that's different or anything that's outside of their scope. We're just saying that students have to continue to remain in a school-related setting for a longer period of time. So, you know.
Okay, very well, very well. And finally, Minister, of course, you know, your organization, you're celebrating 2 years of governance. Again, the vision of education, I suspect, is also part of the Sustainable Development Goal, that long-term development plan that not only this current government spoke about around independence, but also the previous administration. They were the ones who also, by way of introducing it to the national community, they introduced it to the national community. The vision that you have for education, let's say we're revisiting education in your 5th year of governance, when you come back on the Bob Report in your 5th year, as you prepare for another election, what would that vision look like, and what do you hope to be a legacy coming out of your service in that ministry?
Well, for sure, increased access. I mean, and we started on that path. So we've taken away the fees, the games fee, the lab fee, both at primary and secondary. We've taken away those to improve the access. We've removed the tuition policy, the tuition fee at TAMCC and Neuro, and the government pays that now, so that more young people get the opportunity to access. We are moving speedily. We have a goal to have at least one university graduate in every household. And we know that's a huge task, but we are working towards it. And certainly by the time we get to the next 5 years, as you mentioned, I want significant numbers of families to feel the impact of that. In fact, we have a cabinet submission that's coming for first generation university students very shortly, and it will be shared with the public in short order. So that, and then I want to see education adjusted, where we no longer see skills as a taboo subject, where we don't just see it as, well, you can't do the math and you can't do the academic stuff.
So that's you're dunce.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
I want to see that change. So I want them to recognize that the real engineers come from that skill base too. And it's a technical area. And so our brightest students need to feel that skills is a genuine pathway. And we want to change that. So we've been talking about that, we've been preaching about it, and our policy decisions are aligning to make sure that happens. In keeping with that, we want to mainstream skills. But that would mean, you see the things where everybody's doing 15 and 20 subjects and all of that.
Yeah.
It creates problems in my mind. I mean, so there's some background.
It's also expensive too, really, if you think about it. The cost of a subject, look, the cost of a subject for bragging rights, I mean, and this is no disrespect to the folks who have all of their subjects. Sorry, I only graduated with 6 subjects. That's what my working class parents could have afforded at the time when I did, right? And I don't even use a lot of those subjects now in my professional life, you know. So,
and not only that, but the how stretched the curriculum is proving to be a problem for finding time to be able to insert some key areas. You know, we've gone on to introduce Grenadian history. There are other things that we're keen on seeing in the curriculum, but with the clutter that we already have to facilitate the 30-something different areas that somebody must choose from, it makes it difficult. And then there is no sound and solid pathway within the mainstream of education to accommodate skills education to the point where they can be sufficiently skilled and they can have real access to the industry to practice their skill. So there's some changes that need to take place, and I would want to see that happen under my tenure within the next few years. So you ask me what my legacy, those would be some of the things I would want to see in there. So access, financing, repositioning of skills within the mainstream of education. Early childhood is another huge part. We're paying good attention to what's happening down there too, because if we tackle the reading and the numeracy and literacy concerns at that level, then it becomes easier for us to deal with the other issues higher up the grades.
And Minister, may I also suggest, I mean, maybe it's not my place to do this, but this year CXC dropped agricultural science on the idea, the justification that it's a non-performing subject. I mean, and that to me is just an insult to what our economies should be based on, which is food security, right? So I think within that context, there must be a conversation around looking at agriculture in the context of agribusiness as well as looking at it in the context of agronomy and food security as well.
Correct. Well, so let me lay your affairs. The ministers of education within the region, the member territories, did convene a meeting with CXC officials, and that decision has been reversed.
I saw that. Yes, good.
But the truth is, it was the CXC double award that was that was being considered for discontinuation, not the general agricultural science. So the double award, but none of them is going to be withdrawn. But we had deep concern too that areas like green engineering were down for discontinuation because they were not being taken up as speedily as possible. Because as you quite rightly said, we articulated that those areas are critical to our developmental priorities within the region, and not just Grenada, but across the entire Caribbean, across the entire region. So CXC, as a creature of our governments across the region, ought to be in greater sync with our developmental trajectories and support us there. But I think the message was made clear, and they are committed to doing that.
Very well. Very well. Let me, Minister, just 1 second here. We are recording. My camera just did something there. Hold on 1 second.
No problem.
Leon, what happened there? Okay, so you want me to, oh boy, that camera does that sometimes. All right, let me.
Discontinuation because they were not being taken up as speedily as possible. Because as you quite rightly said, we articulated that those areas are critical to our developmental priorities within the region, and not just Grenada, but across the entire Caribbean, across the entire region. So CXC, as a creature of our governments across the region, ought to be in greater sync with our developmental trajectories and
I saw that. Yes, she was good.
But the truth is, it was the CXC double award that was that was being considered for discontinuation, not the general agricultural science. So the double award, but none of them is going to be withdrawn. But we had deep concern too that areas like green engineering were down for discontinuation because they were not being taken up as speedily as possible. Because as you quite rightly said, we articulated that those areas are critical to our developmental priorities within the region, and not just Grenada, but across the entire
Should your loved ones pass on, they deserve to be treated with dignity. And at S.A. Johnson Funeral Home, we can provide you with that service. We can take you every step of the way during your sorrowful moments. When that need arises, call S.A. Johnson Funeral Home at 347-777-9797. That's 347-777-9797. S.A. Johnson Funeral Home is a Caribbean family-owned funeral home here in Brooklyn, providing funeral services, but in a dignified way. From cremation to burial to the repatriation of your loved ones, you don't have to go through the hassle, as we provide exceptional service that allows you to mourn and heal peacefully. For more information, visit our website, www.sajohnsonfuneral.org. Send us an email at sajfuneral@aol.com or call 347-777-9797. 9797. S.A. Johnson Funeral Home, because you deserve to be treated with dignity.
The fishermen are bawling out, the farmers are bawling, the bus drivers, the taxi men. The country's economic situation is in a tailspin. The government is calling a press conference to talk about an issue, one issue that concerns an individual, and the whole country is hurting. So it's clear, it is clear desperation.
And as such, I accept full liability and responsibility for all charges incurred on said account Digicel number 1473-534-5113 from July 2016 to the present date.
Phone gate? I hear they call it phone gate. Watergate, phone gate, brief gate. This one is phone gate. What? Place gate. Banderanti. I'm the lucky man in all this, right? Okay, fella. If you weren't working with the government, you ought not to have been using phones and assuming that, well, heaven's paying for it. Somebody paying for it.
I am good. You all do not worry. All right, let me say that because 2 o'clock this morning, my mobile was ringing, messages were coming. 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, all night, all day today, messages have been coming in. I am okay. You need not worry about me, and talking points will be right here. All right, just letting you all know that. They could try to distract as much as they want. We are still going to speak on the issues on this program.
Viewers and listeners, welcome back to this week's edition of the Bob Report. If you are just joining us, please remember to like and share this week's conversation. It's a very important conversation that we are going to have on good governance, transparency, and accountability in relation to the events that unfolded in Grenada last week. Of course, we want to thank you again for joining us, and we do apologize for some of the issues we were having with the recording from last week with the Minister of Education, the Honorable Senator, the Honorable David Andrew. That interview was cut abruptly, but I assure that you were able to get the true gist and essence of what was articulated. Now, last week's government's decision to pursue legal enforcement measures against NNP activist Sheldon Scott for an unpaid government phone bill he racked up following his departure from government does raise many questions about transparency in administration and the state's ability to enforce its own audit controls in respect of public spending and expenditure. It also raises questions about the telecommunication provider's policy in respect to the service it provides to the state. This segment will pose the following questions. What is government's policy on administering public employee benefits? And are there guardrails against abuse of said benefits? What about the checkout process and policies following the departure from the public service, either as a government minister or as a rank and file public servant? Who administers those checkout policies to ensure that all government property is returned by the outgoing employee, including the politicians? Yes, the politicians at the policy level of the administrative state are employees of the people. They are servants of the people and therefore are should be held to account by the people. Another question, who are the others implicated in this clear breach of spending controls? Now, while the digital leak only implicated Sheldon Scott, data from said leak that was not highlighted by the person who received the document also highlighted the following other cell phone charges at the time, which were all substantially lower than Scott's, but which was still unpaid. The other caveat here is that the names listed on that list were all still members of the Grenada cabinet. Sheldon Scott was not. So what did Delma Thomas owe? Delma Thomas owed $1,272.70. The Prime Minister's security, $1,421.70. Former Minister Oliver Joseph, $3,245.15. Peter David, $3,994.15. And there was one media advisor. We don't know who that media advisor is, but that media advisor is listed there as owing close to 15,000 EC dollars. Who is that media advisor? Some are speculating that it might have been Hamlet Mark. Mr. Mark, was that you, sir? Please come forward and articulate what happened in respect of that phone bill as well. Now, the other high phone bills on that list were incurred by members of the public service who are not implicated here as having unpaid bills. For this segment, we are joined by Mr. Tillman Thomas, the former Prime Minister of Grenada, who is a crusader against anti-corruption, against corruption, that is. Former Accountant General in the Ministry of Finance, Mr. Richard Duncan, and Mr. Valentine Douglas, a forensic accountant. Now, Mr. Kenny Lal Singh, who was appointed as a Minister for Waste Reduction in a previous iteration of the new National Party government, may join us later, but has not given a firm commitment to doing so. In the interest of balance, we also invited Cassandra Mitchell, or Mr. Dave Ned, of the grouping of civil society organizations, but Ms. Mitchell declined, citing other pressing obligations in relation to the ongoing IMF consultations in Grenada. And I want to welcome, Mr. Lal Singh is also here, but I want to welcome our panelists for this program. Mr. Kenny Lal Singh, Mr. Tillman Thomas, former Prime Minister of Grenada. I believe this is Mr. Thomas's very first appearance on the Bub Report. So I'm happy to welcome you, sir, not only as a former Prime Minister, but also as a former journalist. So in many respects, we are colleagues of the pen in many respects. So welcome, Mr. Thomas. Just unmute the mic there, sir. Just unmute your microphone.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure being on your program today.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And we have Mr. Valentine Douglas, who is a forensic accountant. He's joining us. Mr. Douglas, welcome to the Bub Report.
Thank you, and good morning to the panelists and your guest.
Absolutely. And then we have Mr. Richard Duncan, former Accountant General in the government of Grenada. And of course, we knew what happened there in respect of, at least those of us of that generation knew what happened in respect of Mr. Richard Duncan's exit from government at that time. But Mr. Duncan, welcome, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kalon, and good morning to other members of the panel, Mr. Tillman Thomas, and I think it's Mr. Andrew is a second panelist.
Mr. Valentine, yes.
Mr. Valentine, and to the
Valentine Douglas, yes.
Listening and viewing public, Mr. Douglas, thank you.
Yes, and of course, Mr. Lal Singh is also here. And Mr. Lal Singh, once you turn your camera on, we are going to put you on screen. I do apologize for the quality of my camera. I'm going to fix that. But gentlemen, first of all, happy Father's Day to you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Happy Godfather's Day to you, Dr. Bub.
Yes. Thank you for that, sir. Thank you for that. Very well. I trust that the kids will be treating you well today. Now, Mr. Duncan, I want to begin with you. And of course, Mr. Lal Singh is here. Mr. Lal Singh, welcome to the Bub Report, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. And I want to wish all the fathers happy Father's Day And to all your listeners, I want to wish you a wonderful weekend.
Absolutely, and it's a pleasure to have you here, sir. I do know that all of you, it's Father's Day, and I'm sure that you have plans. So I certainly thank you for taking the time to be here.
I have another thing scheduled for this weekend. Just play my part, and we have to see.
No problem, and I will do that. So in fact, here goes. Let me start with you then, Mr. Lal Singh. I'm going to put the others in the back room for now. But Mr. Lal Singh, I want to begin with you. You were appointed by the previous NNP administration as a minister that was tasked with looking at government spending and tasked with ensuring that there was waste reduction within the context of government. Can you talk about that time when you were appointed and what were some of the outcomes of your tenure in that particular ministry?
Yeah, I was appointed Minister of Implementation in 2010. The government of Dr. Kitel. And my task was to look at waste reduction, one, and two, to look at the implementation of projects. And this I carried out at the best way I could. We looked at waste reduction as an area where we can save government lots of money. Government was losing a lot of money through wastage, negligence, and I assume that government loses about 5% of its recurrent revenue and some capital every year, because many of the people do not take the job seriously. During the first year, we found a number of areas where there were wastage. We put in place strategies to curb wastage, how you can do maintenance in a preventative way to cut the costs to government. And during the process, we found that there was a wanton abuse by public servants. Public servants were abusing government's money. And one of the areas was, and I noticed recently, the government has taken someone to court, the abuse in telephone charges. Whether it's PSs, ministers, there were many people going abroad and using the phone on roaming and creating very huge bills that the government had to pay. This we brought to the attention of the cabinet, and immediately strategies were put in place to curb that matter. But it is something that is ongoing. And unless we look at how we can curb expenditures, government will continue to struggle and struggle badly because...
Yes, Mr. Lal Singh, just as two follow-ups. So first of all, can you articulate when that period of time, for those who may not know, when you were in government, when you were appointed as a member of the cabinet? What period was that?
It was in 2013.
So 2013 to 2018? No,
2013 to the end of 2014.
So 2013 to the end of 2014.
I just spent just about 2 years in government.
Okay. Now let us talk about. Let us get down to the weeds in respect of those proposals. What specific proposals did you advance to the cabinet of Grenada, and why were those proposals not implemented?
We brought forward wastages in many places, in the hospital, maintenance of buildings, preventative maintenance. We brought a matter relating to motor vehicles for government. And we drew up a policy to say government should not keep any vehicle for more than 5 years, except it is kept in extremely good conditions. We brought it to the PS Antoine. We discussed it with him, and then we brought it to cabinet. that government should trade in or sell by auction all vehicles 5 years and over, thereby recovering some money as that you can put towards a brand new vehicle. So government was losing a lot of money by keeping all dilapidated vehicles. And that policy was approved. The other one is that there were and there still is many government vehicles being packed up all over the island. And I said to him, this is the decision of the committee. Call an auction and get rid of all those vehicles that are being packed up. Whatever you get for it, you sell it. Whatever you get can go to the treasury and be used wisely. So all of these policies we put in place. We had a preventative maintenance system for maintaining government buildings. We specialize a lot into plumbing. We saw a lot of wastage where water leakage was taking place. And we set up a management committee, a management team to repair schools. We started with schools and other government buildings all over the island. Preventative maintenance. And this was saving the government a lot of money. Within 6 months, I remember the Prime Minister saying that the Waste Management Committee was saving the government a lot of money, you know. But soon after that, they went back to the good old days of spending, complete disregard for government funds. And so we back to square one.
Mr. Larson, was there ever a conversation at that time about government perks doled out to whether it's public servants, high echelon public servants, permanent secretaries, chief personnel officers, chief administrative officers, members of the cabinet in respect of those perks and benefits? Did you ever feel as if that was a conversation that needed to be had? And of course, one of those perks which that has been talked about now in respect of Mr. Sheldon Scott happens to be one of those. So did that ever come up in conversation?
Yes, that came up, and I brought forward the expenditures, the abuse of expenditures regarding cell phone on roaming. So that came up, they knew all about it, but immediately when it was brought to the cabinet and everybody got to know, then the matter was sort of settled where people then checked themselves, because there were PSCs who were doing it, you know, ministers who were doing it. And so the whole system changed somewhat when that was brought to cabinet. But of course, the government did not take action. They should have taken action immediately, either for people to repay, or if you want to pardon them. But the government of NNP left it hanging. And I said, look, we need to make a decision. But no decision was made, because you don't allow things to happen and don't make a decision, because other people come in afterwards will want to do the same thing, and then the government loses.
But you were Minister of Implementation, were you not?
Yes, I was Minister of Implementation in the Prime Minister's ministry.
So therefore, would it not have been on your shoulders to implement the policies or the recommendations that the cabinet recommended? Or is it because you did not spend too much time in the government that you did not have time to implement those recommendations that the committee came up with?
You know, sometimes when you're in government, you go talk all you want. If the powers that be do not take action, nothing happens. People listen to one or two people and no more. So I brought it forward. We got consensus on it, but nobody who in the top authority made it a priority to implement it. And so it never happened. I remember 1 or 2 cars were sold in auction and nothing happened after that. They went back to the same old story. Running vehicles, 8-9 years, government losing money, and refused to buy a new car. And I said, look, every 5 years we do it. But no, the powers that be did not insist.
Okay, very well. And so finally, because I know you have to go, can you talk about this current legal enforcement against Mr. Sheldon Scott that is being requested by the government of Grenada by way of the Office of the Attorney General, who also indicated that she may seek advice from the Office of the DPP in respect of whether or not criminal charges should be brought against Mr. Scott. Can you react to government's decision there to recoup those funds?
Well, again, she's correct. You have to seek the advice of the DPP. This has been many years now it has happened. But I believe and I would like to see ministers, government employees respect the government funds, respect government, and do not abuse it. If you are going to take action against Mr. Scott, maybe you need to take action against many other people, because he was not the only one that committed that offense against the government and then created a useless bill. So he was not the only one. I remember at the time I was there, the manager of ICT had a bigger bill than Sheldon Scott. But I don't care who they are. If it's wrong, it's wrong.
Yeah. You also, and then there is a question of as to whether or not those bills are still unpaid. I do not know that those bills were paid, and so that is a question I believe that we need the Attorney General to answer as well. Unfortunately, I was not able to attend that press conference because of my full-time job, but certainly that is a question I'll be following up with her on.
I agree. It should be. Like I said earlier on, the government must make decisions. If something is wrong and you believe they should pay it back, you should insist that they pay it back. If you want to pardon all of them, then pardon them. Say you have taken a decision, and from here on, nobody should do it. But if you leave it hanging, then others coming along will do the same wrong thing that the other previously did.
Very well. Mr. Lal Singh, thank you so much for your input, sir. This was a much needed, valuable input there, because I believe context matters. Whenever you tell those stories, you can't just only tell one part of the story. The entire issue needs to be ventilated. Any final words, sir, before you go?
Well, I think as Father's Day, I hope everybody have fun. The government is coming up to 2 years in office.
Yes.
And I hope they can see a better and clearer way forward. They would have made some mistakes. They would have done some good things. One can point of good things that they have done. One can point at mistakes that they have made. And being a new government, you expect them to make mistakes. But you can't continue making mistakes all the time. So we need them to continue to manage the affairs of the government and bring benefits to the nation.
Mr. Lal Singh, thank you very much for appearing on the Bub Report this week. But I want to turn my attention now to Mr. Richard Duncan. Richard, welcome back to the program, sir. That's Richard Duncan, OBE. Did I get that correct, Richard? Yes, I believe I got that.
Yeah,
correct. Yes, you did. Yes, yes. It's good to have you here, Mr. Duncan. Now, especially the younger generation of Grenadians. I remember I was still very young. I might be aging myself now, but I was very young as a teenager in that 95 to 99 period when we heard on the news, I was listening to it on radio, that Mr. Richard Duncan was removed as I believe you were Auditor General at the time in government, and that legal action was going to be happening, and it became an entire campaign issue. But and that was at that time. But Mr. Duncan, can you talk about the role of the Auditor General in keeping an eye on runaway spending in government? How much power does the Auditor General have in enforcing spending best practices when they notice that, hey, there is too much money escaping from the kitty?
Yes, so Kalon, thanks very much. The title is Accountant General,
Accountant General. Thank you for the correction.
The role of the Accountant General is really to, keep things in check, as the wheels are turning. The Director of Audit actually comes in after they prepare the final accounts, for auditing and so forth. So that comes after the fact. So,
very well.
Right. So to your question, yes, the Accountant General is the guardian and protector of the public purse. That's one way to put it, and has a very important role to play in that regard. And I could tell you that I'm on record as saying in that famous Commission of Inquiry back in 1996 that there was what I described at the time an orgy of fiscal ill-discipline taking place in the government. And you know what an orgy is? You know what ill-discipline is? Wanton disregard for the rules, for due process, and for conducting business of the government with due regard for economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. That was what I found as the Accountant General. My role was really and truly, as required in law, to put strategies in place to bring it to an end. My efforts met with not bringing it to an end, but bringing my public service career to an end. Mr. Lal Singh made the point earlier that it is important that the powers that be insist on what they see as the correct strategies to manage the fiscal affairs of the government. He used the word insist. And public officers have authority in law and in regulation to manage the public finances. They can and should insist. In some instances, it will cost them their career, it might cost them their health, it might cost them their jobs. But that is what you sign up for. That is what you have taken an oath to do as a public officer. And we have gone past the days of 1995-96. There's a new Public Finance Management Act. There's a new public finance regulations. And the role of the accountable officer being the permanent secretary, as well as others, the director of the Controller of Customs, the Controller of Inland Revenue, those roles and responsibilities are very, very clear. In fact, the words honesty finds itself inside there. And we could go there to see that as a public officer, as an accountable officer, whether you are an accountant general, deputy, permanent secretary, deputy permanent secretary, whatever position you hold, once you fall as an accountable officer, once the regulation impose on you certain responsibilities and obligations, you have to carry them out. Cost it what it will. That is what you have signed up for. You don't do it, it means to me, you are exercising, well, there'll be a direction of duty more or less for you not doing that. All easier said than done. All easier said than done. But that is my, admonition to public officers as a former practitioner myself, that your role is precisely that, to protect the public purse, to ensure that the affairs are conducted with due regard for economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. And those political appointees who, by the way, come and go, do not have the authority that you have in law or in regulation. And therefore, it is up to you to protect the interests of the public as prescribed in law. I'm not hearing you, Dr. Bob.
Yes, Mr. Duncan, would you, however, say that the elephant in the room, the caveat here, is that, yes, public officers have authority in law in respect of enforcing their constitutional obligations, but that when met with the political directorate, sometimes perhaps they might be intimidated or afraid to do so, barring what the consequences may be for their professional futures and professional well-beings in the public service.
Well, I would suggest the opposite, Kelon, by kowtowing to the politician and so on. You're actually jeopardizing your future reputation, career, and good name. the opposite is true, not standing up for what is honest, correct, right, proper, ethical. That can cost you in terms of your career and your future. It's the opposite that will cost you in terms of your good name, your character, and your future. And by the way, those of us or those who are scared, of that, well, to me, wrong-headed outcome, the reality is that any politician could get rid of you at any point in time once the rules of engagement are brought into play. And the Constitution is clear, the laws are clear in terms of how it is. You relieve a public officer of his duties and responsibilities. If you have good grounds, in terms of disciplinary breach and so on, you bring those before the Public Service Commission. If you don't have good grounds, right, you follow certain prescriptions and you get rid of the public officer. So again, the public officer cannot be held a slave in the public service, ought not to be, nor can the public officer hold hostage the political directorate. The rules of engagement allow for amicable separation of those relationships. The problem has been where the politician chooses to embark on a course whereby they will not have to comply with the prescribed rules that require certain compensation of the public officer. And that's what has muddied the water over the years. But those rules are so clean and so clear that if followed, it's an amicable separation between the two parties.
Mm-hmm. And very well, let me bring in Mr. Valentine Douglas here. Mr. Douglas, welcome to the program, sir. This is, again, you're appearing here not as a member of the Grenada Land Actors, but of course as a forensic accountant. Now, talk to us, Mr. Douglas, about how you brought justice to white-collar criminals in government. Now, your record includes the arrest and conviction of public office holders, including a New York State senator, executive staff in the executive arm of government in New York State, managerial employees, contractors, and members of organized crime families. Your record is very impressive as a forensic accountant, and that's why we felt it was important to invite you here. Talk about enforcement there. How are you as a creature of accountability able to be given legal powers to go after those who were in breach of proper state procedures in respect of public accountability?
Thank you. I must say that the system there is completely different from here. You have independence in that Inspector General's office are totally independent of the government, what would have been the government ministry in Grenada. All government agencies have to basically abide by what, when an investigation begins, they don't have any line that they can follow up to a mayor or governor and say, get off my back. It's a process where you, through subpoena power or through other arrangements, can walk in to any government office, request records without notice, copy and remove records, and also summon people immediately. They have whistleblower laws there where government employees are totally protected from any sort of retribution from elected officials. So I say that to sort of introduce the fact that the system works differently. And here in Grenada, had we had something like that, we probably may not be encountering these problems that Mr. Duncan had encountered, or what Mr. Lal Singh has encountered, because you would have an enforcement arm that is totally independent, that can do anything in terms of an investigation without any intervention on the part of any politician or anyone in the government structure. So back to New York, I worked with the Department of Investigation, City Department of Investigation, and I went up to the rank of a First Deputy Inspector General, and I worked with the State Inspector General as also a Chief Forensic Accountant and Chief Auditor. And most of our cases were investigated together with law enforcement agents in the federal government, and cases were prosecuted mainly by the federal prosecutors, Southern District of New York and Eastern District of New York. We were able to make those cases because we had, as I mentioned, that sort of unlimited access to records. We have a climate and an environment that is different from what we have here. Now, when you look at a situation where you have a government agency, people there know the consequences of their failure to cooperate with you as an independent investigative organization. And they are very cooperative when they're subpoenaed, when they ask questions, there's no concealment, because the consequence for them is severe. They themselves could face termination for not cooperating. It's in the statute. You cannot fail to cooperate unless if you want to claim the fifth, that is self-incrimination. And few people go that way because unless they involve. If they involve, they probably would come to you and say, yes, I'm involved, but I was directed by X person. So you would get a cooperation, and they may get a cooperation agreement for working with you on the case. And if they are convicted, their sentences would be minimized. So most of your cases are so well structured, through your training and through interaction with the prosecutors. You work with the prosecutor most times from get-go, because after you've built a reputation and you've had some good cases with a prosecutor, and a matter comes up, and allegations can be, basically a direct allegation, or someone may come in and say they suspect certain things is going on, and they have certain indicators, what you call red flags. You would, having a relationship with a prosecutor, would call a prosecutor and say, this is what's going on, and you plan a course of action, how you would approach it. And you have the ability to get a grand jury subpoena right there, and the prosecutor, whether it's a federal or state, could give you a grand jury subpoena. And most people that you serve with a grand jury subpoena, they understand that there is a degree of confidentiality, that they disclose what they give to you, and because of the grand jury process. So we are able to work on people, and we get the cooperation of people who are involved in the criminal activity or who witness it. They are very cooperative, because of the consequences they face. In Grenada, it's different. And once you don't have that climate here, you don't have that environment, would be difficult to prosecute cases, because people can be political appointees, but whether or not they can produce, or whether or not they can show the independence, and as Mr. Lalsing said, provide a service to government rather than almost acting on behalf of a politician. So I say all of that to show that we are basically working in a completely different environment. And as a result, the hindrances that you have here, you would not encounter it up there. So I know that,
Yeah, certainly. And of course, some may say that we're saving the last opening bat here for last. We're saving the best for last, rather, with Mr. Thomas. Mr. Thomas, of course, you, when you were the Prime Minister of Grenada, one of the things that the citizens of the state cannot say is that whenever somebody committed any kinds of malfeasance, I'm talking now about those who are appointed to serve in the cabinet of Grenada, that you just had a light touch approach to it. In fact, you ensured that they were held accountable. talk about, Mr. Thomas, how you addressed whether it's notions of conflict of interest, whether it's notions of a government impropriety in respect of spending, abuse of privileges and benefits, people going on unauthorized trips. How did you deal with those issues?
Okay, Dr. Bob, let me begin by wishing all the fathers on the program Happy Father's Day, and all the fathers in the state of Grenada, Carriacou, and Martinique, Happy Father's Day. Now, Dr. Bob, we have to be realistic in dealing with our system of governance. There's what you call the trusteeship aspect of governance, and this has been ignored totally by the new National Party. We have to be realistic because, you see, organizations and countries have to be directed and controlled, and this has to be done through governance. You must have policies, and these policies have to be implemented. So we cannot just sit back and permit officers or people to do what they want within the system. We have to always remember that this aspect of trusteeship, and in particular to protect the citizens of the country, to safeguard the assets of the country. And this is where the breakdown generally comes in. A total disregard for the assets of the country. And people are preoccupied with the party and those who support them, and tend to ignore the rules and regulation. We're supposed to comply with the Constitution. There are rules and regulation in the public service. For instance, as far as I could recall, during our tenure in government between 2008 2013, persons holding government phones were given a limit. There was a limit on that phone. And once that officer goes above the limit, that officer had to be responsible or accountable for the rest. You're not you give your phone and you do what you want with it. I imagine with when it came into office, they may have changed this policy, but that was the policy. And it is well established too, that the moment you're no longer holding an office, you're supposed to surrender the asset, whatever you have belonging to that office, like a phone or other documents, whatever it is. In the case of Sheldon Scott, the moment he ceased to be a senator, he had to surrender that phone because it's taxpayers' money paying for that phone, and taxpayers' money not supposed to be used to pay for activities of the new National Party. And that is the reality. I mean, some may want to duck and hide from it, but we have to be realistic. So that trusteeship aspect of governance has been totally neglected or rejected by the new National Party. I mean, there are several other aspects of that we should not ignore. Look at the shrimp farm scandal. Again, it's a trusteeship. You forget the people of Grenada. You're no longer protecting the assets of Grenada, but doing things on your own. And there are several other items or areas we could refer to. What I regard as those in authority aiding and abetting the plundering of the states. Because there are several persons who came here and exploited Grenada, the resources of the country. They're gone with our resources. And the citizens are suffering because of that. We have less money because of the way the governance aspect of the country was neglected. So central to this is governance, and those in authority, in particular the political directorate, they have to send a message, and permanent secretaries and others, so they have to know we're working for the state. You also have a trusteeship responsibility. You are not there to carry out what it dictates of politicians. There are rules and regulations. So it is that, in my view, that philosophy of putting party before country and permitting party officials to exploit the state. This is really something that we have to reflect on and something we have to try to correct.
Yeah. So in speaking on those reflections, in your tenure as Prime Minister, you fired former Minister Joe Gilbert. You fired former Minister, I believe it was Carl Hood. Mr. Michael Church, I believe, on going on an unauthorized trip, I believe that was. Can you talk about your decision quality when those reports came to you that, hey, Minister X or Minister Y did X or Y? What was your decision quality when it comes to saying, you know what, I don't necessarily care about the political consequences of doing so, but I will do so regardless?
Yeah, because I say because of the trusteeship aspect of governance, and we represent the people collectively as a cabinet. We're responsible to the people. So when Minister Church went to the United Nations and then ended up somewhere in Europe, negotiating some deal in connection with Patrick Antoine, and I felt that was not in the best interest of the people of Grenada, and that was a dangerous precedent. So we had to deal with it. We had to remove him from the office. I think he was demoted, removed from that office. And we had another aspect again, because of what we stood for as a party. We were talking to people who were approaching the country, approaching us about casino gambling and so on. We never took a decision on it. But Minister Gilbert then wrote some organization and giving them the assurance that we are leaning in that direction, and we were not. So again, I had to take a stand on it. You know, there was another issue. This time we didn't have to fire, but we had an issue with Kenrick Fullerton in a ministry where things went wrong, and we permitted the law to take its place. I did not interfere at all. I said the rule of law must prevail. If a minister or any individual violates the law, he or she must stand the consequences, and that is the approach I took toward in the decisions.
Well, except Mr. Thomas, I would say Mr. Fullerton is back with this current iteration of the National Democratic Congress. Yeah, which I don't know if that gives you pause.
No, the law took its course. We didn't interfere. We said that the law takes its course. If you make an accusation against him, let the law take its course. We did not direct those in law enforcement, to not to proceed or to do anything. We say let justice prevail. Yeah.
Okay.
So
and I suspect in this matter as well, in relation to Mr. Sheldon Scott, and we will get to the weeds concerning this particular issue. I suspect you also believe that the law should prevail. How do you think the Attorney General handled this matter in respect of the announcement? The opposition is claiming that this is purely political, that it is a witch hunt, that they're going after Mr. Scott because he's one of the most vocal opponents against the administration, that it's a distraction from the other issues of alleged malfeasance that the current administration is confronted with in relation to allegations such as perhaps what might be happening at the National Lotteries Authority and things like that. Your thoughts on their response to this move by the Attorney General?
No, that's not a witch hunt at all, man. We have to the rule of law must prevail. No individual should be permitted to abuse the resources of the state, and that went on for years, for months, or for years. So I think the Attorney General is doing the right thing. I mean, the government is in office 2 years, going to be 2 years this month. There are lots of issues to be addressed, and in particular, I think a message must be sent to those who take it on their own to abuse and exploit state resources. Again, it's sometimes aided and abetted by the political directorate. So I mean, there's no witch hunt there getting at anybody. And if there's wrongdoing going on in any statutory body or any in the state right now, investigation should be done and let the public know what is going on, because they're boards of directors. This is what governance is all about. The board of directors is supposed to give direction to the organization that they're directing, and they're supposed to comply with the rules and regulation. And if they fail to do it, then they should be called to account. They should be exposed, or they could charge them if it becomes necessary. So I mean, the Sheldon Scott thing is, I mean, it's a scandal. As I say, NNP, in my view, has a record, a history of aiding and abetting the plundering of the resources of Grenada, and that is just part of it. The Sheldon Scott issue is just part of this plundering of the resources of the country. That could have been, the moment this man ceased to be a senator, those who have oversight over him had to make sure that he surrendered that phone. That phone no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the government of Grenada. And if you are protecting the interests of the people of Grenada, you ought to make sure that this phone is supposed to be in the right place, in the hands of the government of Grenada, and not an individual who no longer functioning as an agent of the government.
Yeah, Mr. Duncan, let me bring you back in here, sir. And so I want to put you in the driver's seat. Let's do a simulation, shall we, if you will. You were audited. If let's say you were Auditor General at the time that a government minister or a public servant, continued to use a government-issued device following whether it's their removal or recusal from office, however they left office. What would be the protocol involved in enforcing that best practice to ensure that you recover that particular device from that person, or that they continue to use government services? What does the enforcement mechanism look like there?
Well, no, I think it's very simple in the case of the cell phone, whereby the accountable officer in the Scott case could either be the Clerk of Parliament or the Accountant General could act. And you notify the receiver of the POC that it is no longer something that he or she is entitled to, and that effective so and so date, it will be terminated. So I always like to say I give people, due notice. And as a matter of fact, to Mr. Thomas's point, the decent and honest thing to do is to turn into the Clerk of Parliament, who is your accountable officer, the cell phone. Or to say, I would like to keep this cell phone number because so many people know about it and so on. So I would appreciate if you would write the company to, take me off of the billing system, but I hold a number, right? That is another, what would I say, gracious way in which to bring an end to that person having further access to the arrangement. It's like if you, and I think the question might be, right, in the instant case, what other perks and benefits, right, did Mr. Scott hold on to having left the Senate? The cell phone is only one. I showed the other perks that he did not hold on to because somebody put a stop to it. If you get my point. So, yes, and then the Accountant General or the Clerk of Parliament could simply write the telephone company, giving them the instructions that henceforth this number is to be removed from the billing of the government of Grenada. That is a done deal. You will not be billed, or if you are billed subsequently, then you are exposing yourself as the telephone company after I told you that this number no longer belongs to the government of Grenada. You cannot be showing up, on subsequent bills and so on. So that is the rule, But I keep saying to people that, we could preach all the ethics that we want. We could teach all the ethics that we want. What you cannot do is to teach people ethical behavior. I keep making the point. You could,
but yes, Mr. Duncan, you are correct. But let us also teach the government how to enforce their best practice, because we're talking about Mr. Scott here as well. But and you mentioned the gracious ways of doing it. Go ahead.
I told you in the first instance what the government supposed to do. I told you who has to act.
Yes, you did.
I answered that part already. I'm saying to you that for the system to work, everyone has to play his or her part. And I'm saying the dignified thing to do, if you are no longer entitled, you have to act. Your failure to act does not mean, or the government failure to act, either way, does not mean one party is right or one party is wrong. It means that there was a breakdown in the system. And I think the point was made a while earlier by Mr. Douglas, right? When he suggested you could have a whistleblower who would blow a whistle on a particular situation and action will be instigated. He also made the point that people sometimes could be cowed into not acting, right? So people know they're supposed to act, but who, me, right? Because of the repercussions and so on for doing what is right. And I think that is where Mr. Tillman Thomas is making the point, that the tone at the top matters. I repeat, the tone at the top, the signal that you send, those signals matter as to how people will behave and not behave. Both those who are responsible for acting and those who are responsible for behaving in a particular manner. I could tell you in my own case, right, my own experience as accountant general and so on, I was, held to account for doing what? For asking for a due diligence exercise on a gentleman who was engaging in a high-value transaction with the government of Grenada. And the issue was the Prime Minister has already endorsed the transaction, so you are in no position to pursue due diligence on this gentleman. And I'm saying, I beg your very pardon. Anything goes wrong, the Accountant General, Permanent Secretary of Finance, will be held accountable. And the obligation placed on me is to ensure that I protect you as the Minister of Finance, to make sure that is on record that this individual has passed muster so that the transaction can proceed. But people don't always appreciate that. And it is that attitude, I think, that has resulted in so many failed undertakings in the public service over the years. Mr. Thomas referred to one a while ago, the shrimp farm. $50-something million gone because the technocrats, to my mind, are not allowed to do the job for which they have been hired, trained, and empowered to do in law and regulation. He calls it trusteeship, he calls it governance, and I agree with him fully.
Mr. Douglas, I know that you functioned in a totally different jurisdiction, and you've been hearing this conversation here in respect to this issue, but I'm sure you do have some thoughts in respect of the limitations in respect of enforcement and that honor system that Mr. Duncan speaks about. In this particular case, one of the lessons coming out of this for me is that the honor system sometimes doesn't really work.
Well, the honor system fails, and probably it fails regularly in Grenada because of the political system that we work under. In this situation here, clearly, what you have in a case of fraud or corruption is that you must have the environment, as Mr. Duncan was suggesting, and then you must have the opportunity. Clearly, the environment that exists at that government ministry allowed Mr. Scott to take the phone improperly after his separation from service. As everyone says, and it's clearly known that he should not have been in the possession of that phone. He clearly had the ethical, moral value there at play. And you know that when you're in possession of something that does not belong to you, you shouldn't use it. And he used it improperly. He benefited improperly. So the time comes now for him to pay, and he should pay, and he should pay upfront. So it is proper to take legal actions to get back what is due to the government, no matter what you claim to take responsibility. Responsibility does not pay the bill. You have to come up with the cash now. And it's clear the benefits that he got was because you had an environment where anything was allowed to happen. It was a sort of anything goes environment. And the government at that time should be held responsible too, as Mr. Duncan was suggested. There must be someone who had to be responsible for getting the phone and any other government asset that he has in his possession on separation. And the neglect by that person should be something that should be addressed. And if you had people at the top within that ministry or whomever else he has to report to acting properly, they should bear some of the consequence of not protecting the government assets or neglecting to protect the government assets. So in that sort of environment, we need, when your situation is like that, where one person would say, okay, we have all these rules, all these policies, all these regulations, and come here, and because someone in power decides, okay, you don't have to do it because I say it's okay. We have to change that culture. We need a serious change of culture here. And we have a lot to change: work ethic, office policy procedures needs to be enhanced. We need to have proper enforcement, because you can have everything written in the books, policy, this, to do that, to follow that. Unless you have someone who has the mettle to come forth and enforce those things, we're spinning top in mud. So where does the enforcement come in here? I would advocate that it has to be totally independent of government and all government ministries. Because as government changes, you'd have players who would come in and would just let things happen the way they want. That sort of segues to who are the perceived enforcers in Grenada, and it's a lot of
watchdogs. The watchdogs.
Watchdogs, yeah.
Yes. I mean, we have the Integrity Commission.
Well, yes, we have the Integrity Commission, but the Integrity Commission was formed out of convention by the Inter-American Group and UN, United Nations. And the way it was set up was that they're looking at accountability from public officers primarily, and they also do investigation. So a lot of the resources go into getting financial disclosure for about 33 groups of public officers, checking for accuracy and completeness, and then, making sure that that information is filed confidentially. If not, and they see some sort of problems in the filing, they have to request a tribunal to investigate that person and make appropriate recommendations subsequently. Now, if you look at the chart of the organizational chart of the Integrity Commission, you would see they have 2 investigators and 2 compliance officers. The compliance officers obviously would function for the financial disclosure. 2 investigators at the Integrity Commission cannot attend to the needs of the ministries, government, the parliament, the statutory bodies. They just basically cannot do that. The Integrity Commission needs a lot more resources to be a functional thing. There is this expectation that, well, they should handle this, they can do this, they can make recommendations, they can change systems, they can enforce. When you don't have the resources, there's no way you can do it. So that's a starting point if they want to use the Integrity Commission. But short of that, they may need to set up a different entity, which would be like a real government watchdog, sort of on the basis of the Inspector General's office, that would hold all public offices, all public government ministries, all statutory bodies, and they have to account. We need people to get in there, do reviews of their systems, look for corruption prevention situation that needs changing and enhancing, and with that, be able to do investigation. One of the hallmarks of the system in the United States is that they do those investigations and they do reports, and those reports are public and they are on the website. So, for example, I worked at the Department of Investigation, and there are significant reports of malfeasance or other problems that's on that site for over 20 years. You can go back to the Department of Investigation website, look at reports, and you can see reports from 2003. Actually, there's one from me that's there from, I think, 2005 or 2006. So the public, you have, in providing the public with that service, is the disclosure. That's part of the transparency that we lack in. That people need to know when you have a situation as the phone problem, that people know the details. They know how it happened, they know the lack of control, they know all of the parties that involved and what is being done. And if this had come in 2019, by a couple of months, there should be a report. It's not a big issue that you shouldn't have a report, and the report should be made public. And I think until we get to the stage where the public knows that these problems are being addressed, they know that if there is corruption, it's being exposed, and that there is clear information that is getting out to the public of exactly what transpired, that would build a trust, that would preserve integrity, and that would maintain the governance that we need to operate well in Grenada.
Mr. Thomas, I want you to react to what Mr. Douglas just articulated here in respect of having those institutional watchdog arrangements in place that has that legal teeth to be able to hold a government accountable, but they're also independent. Isn't that the role of the Public Accounts Committee in Parliament? But which, again, yes, you have the Public Accounts Committee, but in the context of the previous administration, there really was not a fully constituted Public Accounts Committee, given that it was a one-party type of setup in the Parliament.
Yes, that's the role of the Public Accounts Committee. I agree with Mr. Douglas fully. We need that. But again, because of the political system, there are times that, like the last administration, there was no Public Accounts Committee in the true sense, because there was no opposition. But I agree, we need some independent body to investigate and to hold those responsible, hold them accountable. This is very important that we do not give up on this. We have to get those in position, especially politicians and public officers, to account for the funds of the state, for the resources of the country. I mean, it's a lot. We have lost millions of dollars because of the absence of such a system to hold them accountable and to get them to the court. It's a problem. They said that they were going to investigate the shrimp farm matter. We never heard anything about it. But there is need to review our present system and to come up with an investigative arm, to really hold public officials accountable in a serious way, to bring them before the court if it becomes necessary. So I endorse what Mr. Douglas has said. We need this within our system, because there seems to be a sort of a disregard for the trusteeship aspect of government. A lot of people supposed to be trustees, they no longer trustees. They don't behave as trustees. They don't think about the welfare and well-being of Grenada, because the millions of dollars have gone down in some of these failed scandals and projects, whatever it is, that could have been contributing toward the WASH program and different programs in Grenada to improve the lives of the so-called poor and vulnerable you're talking about. Those who govern the country in the last 15 years or so, they have made it difficult for the so-called poor and vulnerable by not protecting the resources of the country, and make it difficult, for those in government today. Though I must admit that they have tried, they have been doing fairly well. I believe that the present NDC administration is doing a fairly good job, and I haven't heard of any scandals, any investor coming in and trying to undermine and to leave Grenada with money. And I think we have to be guarded against all these things.
Certainly you might not have heard of any, I suppose, foreign investors coming in, but there are certainly questions around conflict of interest issues in respect of what might be happening at the Grenada National Lotteries Authority that we'll be investigating, concerns over conflict of interest in respect of the Prime Minister's role or his company's role as a CBI agent. That's another conflict of interest issue that has emerged. Again, those issues need to also be properly ventilated.
Yeah, those need to be investigated. And I say, I totally, as a matter of fact, as you yourself know that it was the past NDC administration who removed criminal libel from the book so that journalists could,
freely express,
investigate and express yourself. Yeah, I totally, wherever, these allegations prop up, I think they need to be investigated. Of course, there's a tendency to exaggerate. You see, what I discover is that the NNP administration, when the NDC came into office 2 years ago, they made certain predictions about failure and collapse and the young and they cannot perform. And it turned out that they're performing far better than the NNP did in the last 2 years. With the pension, they said they're going to be filled. The minimum wage, whatever. There are lots of things that they have done. The NNP authority said that cannot be done. And it's done. So they're looking for things now to pin this administration. But overall, I think we have to give this administration credit for what they have done in the last 2 years.
Very well, and of course, and thank you for acknowledging that no government is perfect and that all governments have their limitations. I know you would, sir, in doing so. And for those who do not know, Mr. Thomas, you and I probably in the era of the revolution, we might have shared a jail cell together if I was around during that time.
Yes,
because
maybe,
you went to jail. You went to jail over the ability of the Fourth Estate and the media to freely.
Yes, the Grenadian Voice. We published the Grenadian Voice. Yeah.
Correct. And so Leslie Pierre, my very first teacher of media, you also come from that school. So I have respect for you.
May his soul rest in peace.
May his soul rest in peace. But Mr. Duncan, and then we'll take a break and come to viewer comments. Let us get to the other aspect of this story, sir, and that has to do with the telecommunications provider seeing that there is this huge unpaid bill, right? And we're talking about, and I'm going to share the screen because that is now public knowledge. That's in the public domain. It was leaked by an NDC activist. But in just looking at the bill, Mr. Duncan, if you and I were to receive a late notice of payment, would we not be disconnected? How is it that Digicel also just allowed that to happen without any putting in their own systems of accountability in place?
Yeah, well, Kelon, it depends. We are in a market, of willing buyer, willing seller, and so forth, and that contractual obligation. But I would say to you that these telecom industries are not, without blame in terms of how it is. They are go about managing their business relationships with large customers. So, for example, there's something called telex, right? Receiving a telex, and large companies have subscribed for telex services from these companies. And after the telex went out of vogue and fax came in as a replacement, large companies are still receiving bills for telex services only because they did not write the company to say disconnect my telex services. Large companies that put in backup lines for the Y2K, that's the year 2000, supposed catastrophe that was going to come around, have found themselves paying these bills for years after the Y2K fear was dealt with, only because these companies have not written to say disconnect my Y2K, line.
Right.
So I'm saying in the contract, okay, the service provider, you being a large customer, will not want to disrupt your services, will not want to disrupt what you are doing by disconnecting you, because they verily believe that as contractual party and so on, you will in due course honor your obligations. And I think that's the mindset that they have. So it is up to the people who are purchasing these services now to be diligent and vigilant over what it is they are being billed for. And if you're no longer using it, obviously, you should draw to their attention that it should be disconnected. Thereafter, you have a case against them if it is not disconnected. So two things here. One, is it in these instances that the services ought not to have been consumed because I have notified you I no longer want it? And if I didn't notify you, then it's on me. Secondly, if we enter a contract which says that my maximum bill shall not exceed X number of minutes or megabytes or dollar value, if that's in the contract, it is on you, the provider, if I cross that limit, because I authorize you to automatically cut me off once I cross a particular limit. And those people who are into the top-up business, when your minute's done, you can't call again, your minutes are finished. So large...
That's the point.
no. But again, we have to see the contract that has been signed.
Yes.
Not in the contract, we cannot hold any party to account right now. So that said, that will be my response to you in terms of what these large companies do, why they do it the way they do it, and why it's on you, you know what I mean, the consumer, to look after and protect your interests. And in this case, the consumer, for all intents and purposes, was the government of Grenada. Hence the reason they paid. And the government is now saying that, the ultimate consumer in Mr. Scott, right, ought not to have consumed this thing. He knows he ought not to have consumed it, right? And therefore, let us find a way to have him make good. And he has agreed that he will make good. So just a matter of, I would suspect, the two parties meeting and, deciding how it is, they will settle.
That good faith commitment was made, because again, that letter was written and read out publicly by him, and that was back in 2019. We are now in 2024, so a couple questions there need to be asked as well.
But again, it all comes back to the role of the public officer. So here it is: the gentleman has admitted that I have done wrong, I have erred, right, and I'm willing to sit down and come up with a payment plan and so forth. So it's now on the permanent secretary, as the accountable officer, to engage the gentleman to see, okay, let's sit down and go through, let us look at your income, look at your expenses, and so on and so forth. What can we do, and so on. You walk it out, you say, okay, don't you think, Mr. Scott, in light of that, it might be better that you approach the credit union or the banks and so on to get, a low-cost loan? You look for ways and means for which you can, graciously and comfortably have the gentleman, meet those obligations that he has agreed to meet. So my question from a public administration standpoint would be whether and to what extent the permanent secretary can provide evidence where he or she has treated with Mr. Scott's letter to come to an amicable solution. So sometimes people write, when you write them back to say, okay, let's talk, or you call and so on and so forth, they begin to avoid the issue and so on, and you cannot get to meet them. First meeting failed, second meeting, it did not work out and so on and so forth. You have to continue, to exercise good effort to have the person, engaged to make good the commitment to have the matter settled. If the PS could show evidence that attempts were made to engage Mr. Scott to make good on his offer of settlement and so on, then it's on Mr. Scott now, having failed to respond to the PS and so on, to give account to somebody else as to the settlement that he has agreed to make.
Listeners, I see Michael already smiling. He anticipates what I would say. My good friend.
Yeah, and I put my head on a block, and I offer Mr. Brother Bishop the scalpel to cut it off.
The political leader has said several times up to last night that that is not a reflection of her personal views or the views of the party. And you understand, George, how elections at the party level work.
So, Dr. Pei, do you have ties? Do you have ties to the National Democratic Congress, Dr. Pei? Or rather, were you commissioned by the NDC to do
use
this
that
poll?
information because it seems interesting that a lot of your advice is very consistent with what was said. Brilliant.
And Claudette, good luck with everything.
You too, man. May the best candidate win in the town of St. George.
But kill on.
Yes.
You is a tough man too, so stop at that. Tell everybody you're a tough man too.
We are a people who have always aspired for more, who always aspired to do better. We've always accepted that not because your mother didn't go to secondary school, you should go. It has always been the other way around. You should aspire.
You've been there for a long time. Want to be queen of St. Andrews, but yet the problems around you you're not seeing. You can pray yourself out of the problems in St. Andrews.
You must. Some persons were getting pension after 2 terms in office, right? And the persons that work for 26 years plus not getting anything. It's just unfair.
God is good, and God looks after me. You know, not just my wife is no longer here, so both herself and the father up there are looking after me very, very well indeed.
Not a few people that you pick up by the side of the road to run in an election. These are not people that you mustered up and you pulled together a few months before you think an election is going to call and you say we want to win an election, so let's come together.
And viewers and listeners, welcome back to this week's edition of the Bub Report. We are now going to have an opportunity to take some of your viewer comments, certainly not all of them, because I want to respect the time of our panel fathers. And I'm sure, I do know that the audience was duly and properly engaged, gentlemen, in this conversation. So I do want to get them involved at this stage. And so hopefully all of you gentlemen can lend your expertise to some of the questions that are being asked by the audience here. So we have Ernesto is saying we need to find that media advisor to pay $15,000, that $15,000 phone bill. Well, let us find out who that media advisor is, because that was another major bill there on that list as well. And so I believe there has to be some kind of auditing in respect of ensuring that everyone on that list is held to account in respect of their bills. Mr. Duncan, what say you? Now, Dr. Mitchell, when this story broke, Dr. Mitchell said that there were other people involved as well, but he didn't say whether or not those folks did not pay their bills or what. Your thoughts on that idea, that perhaps there needs to be a full audit on this situation?
Well, I think a full audit will help and lead to an enhancement in public administration and the management of the public finances, because some of the people who are on the bill, right, might very well be rightly so on that listing. So even the media advisor, let's assume that he is duly entitled to a cell phone to be paid for by the government of Grenada with no limit on it. He's in order, or she's in order. The other people would be in order. We do not know, again, what the contractual obligations are. The breach that Mr. Scott is accused of is having, even though Mr. Scott's bill was for $1 after he was no longer a senator, he is in breach. That's the issue. This is not a quantum. The issue is the principle that you are
no longer serving in government. And I believe Lydia James made that point as well, yes, in the comment section.
And
yes.
I'm saying that to simply put the bill up there and say this post no and that post no, that balance standing, and it might rightly be so. There's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely. So let us not, muddy the water and bring people in to make confusion. They might very well be. hold of a government cell phone on a list, authorized to be used as they see fit, with no limit, and therefore that's the balance due and owed at that time. I think the allegation here is that among the people on that list, it is public knowledge that Mr. Scott at a certain point in time ought not to have been using a phone. If there are other people on there, even if they owe $1 who ought not to be on that list, then you point them out. We can't just put the list up and just calling people here, for calling a namesake. That is not fair to Mr. Scott, to the situation, or to the public interest in trying to get a good understanding as to what really has transpired.
What
and how we
transpired
can
there.
prevent it in the future.
We have another commenter, and again, the pattern of wastage is ongoing as we observe with the continued rising renting from the private sector to house public services. Any thoughts on that, gentlemen? Mr. I mean, we do have the ministerial complex.
I could chime in on the whole question of rental. In the sense that, as an employer, the government owe a duty to its employees to provide a minimum quality of work life, including the physical space in which they operate. What is the history of government? Neglect of those buildings for years. You walk into some ministries, my friend, it is embarrassing, in my view. Some of the public area where the public gathers, right, might look a little semi-decent and so, but really and truly, what you want your customers, the taxpayers, to encounter when they visit our workplace and the people whom you hire, it is downright horrible, in my view. How do you get to upgrade these things while people continue to work in those environments? Obviously, it is not possible. So you develop a plan to move out and then you move back in, and hopefully with preventative maintenance as a key part of what you do on any asset, you will be able to avoid, this thing. Now, I think my other comment is that the lessons taught to us by COVID-19 should not be ignored, whereby working remotely, use of technology to minimize the demand on office space, right, is something that we should consider going forward in terms of the new work modalities that can be introduced in the public service. Yes.
We have another question here from Mr. Ned. Mr. Ned, I see that you're very active in the comment section. Perhaps it would have been good to have you on the panel, sir. Both you and Sister Cassandra, because I believe your opinions in the public sphere are extremely valuable. And so, but I would get to your question. You said, can your guest comment on the effect of regularization of the public service? I believe it's the regularization of the public service, the normalization of contract workers into the public service, who are now responsible to the minister. Would that have an effect on? I'm not too sure what you're getting at there. Any one of you want to tackle that question?
Well, I'm not sure what the person is getting at, but regularization, I think, is a step in the right direction. It will help to reduce, in my view, the preponderance of people in the service who believe that they owe their appointment and their promotion and their longevity in the service to showing allegiance to a particular politician or political party, because their allegiance and their loyalty is to the principles of good governance, is to the oath to uphold the laws and institutions of the country, the oath they take with the Governor General and stuff like that. That is what you have to be loyal to, not the whims and fancies of a politician. So once you are regularized, in my view, it is the beginning of the reprofessionalization of the public service. And by the way, preparing or giving people duties and responsibilities for which they are ill-prepared and ill-trained or not trained at all is an abuse of these people. You cannot give people jobs, responsibilities, and do not train and mold them to carry it out. It is not right. Therefore, when the system fails, you ask yourself, why has it failed? Because the way you design and you work the system, it has to fail. It is designed to fail. to give the politician the hegemony over the public service. So I'm saying that there's an opportunity to reprofessionalize and to correct some of those weaknesses.
Yeah, Mr. Thomas, I believe this question, as a learned attorney, this question would be targeted to you. But Ms. Cassandra Mitchell is asking, in the context of a democracy, investigations are initiated by the DPP and or the chief of police. The Constitution allows in few cases the office of the GG the power to discipline or remove a person from the office of the due process. I believe what Ms. Mitchell is saying here is that perhaps the Attorney General should allow the independent office of the Director of Public Prosecution or the Police Prosecution Office of the RDPF to initiate this investigation or to initiate enforcement, and not the office of the Attorney General.
I see nothing wrong with the Attorney General initiating the process. This is more like a civil matter. You see, the legal department, Scott admitted, there isn't much to be investigated there, He's engaging in some form of dialogue with the Ministry of Legal Affairs to pay the amount. So I see nothing wrong with the Attorney General taking the initiative. If it turns out that there's a criminal aspect to it, then the DPP could be brought in. But I see nothing wrong. The legal department has an obligation to protect the assets of the country too. And I see nothing wrong with the AG initiating that process to engage in a civil discussion to settle the matter. Because what is there to be investigated after you admitted that you want to pay the money?
Yeah. Mr. Douglas?
Yeah, I was just endorsing what the former Prime Minister said. Clearly, this is a clear civil matter. You have an admission here. You have someone who admitted to taking responsibility. It's a collection problem you have now. It's just to collect what is due. He said he's taking responsibility. He admitted that he overran the bill. Well, whatever else he admitted, I don't know the details, but it's a collection process. And the AG has the right, and basically is the proper person to file that civil charge against him for not paying what he promised.
And so because it's a civil matter, both you gentlemen, Mr. Thomas and Mr. Douglas, you're saying here that there is nothing wrong with that. Okay. Let us get to two final questions. Can we address everyone who owes taxes? What about those who are no longer employed but are still receiving salaries? Let us clean up these issues and discuss statute of limitations. Mr. Duncan, has there ever been a situation where someone quits government and they keep receiving government benefits? Outside of this cell phone issue, of course.
No, of course. I mean, you have two extremes. You have people who work with government for months and don't get pay, right? And you have people who don't work with government for months and do get pay. So I'm saying that there are administrative deficiencies in the system. So a public officer could walk off the job, tells nobody anything, and it will take months before somebody raises their hand and say, this person has not reported for duty, and therefore they have abandoned their position. Or they'll represent to the Public Service Commission that that person has abandoned their position. And when they do that, then the Public Service Commission would act to write the person and say, you have abandoned your position, and that's it. The effective date of that abandonment should be from the day you didn't show up, or from the day your accumulated vacation expired, and therefore any pay you got beyond that should be returned to the state coffers, right? But that is possible. And I said before, the opposite is also true.
Also
where people can work for 3, 4, 5 months as teachers, as regular public officers, and don't get paid. So I'm saying these administrative deficiencies need to be worked upon. In terms of taxpayers and people owing taxes are not paying and so on, that is egregious to my mind. That it is written in the Bible that you render unto Caesar what is due unto him. And that is how the state functions. And therefore, those who are entitled to pay their fair share and are not paying, it calls on the tax authorities, to Mr. Douglas' point, to have the capacity and the capability to properly enforce, again, the laws and regulations for which you have been properly appointed to carry out, regardless of what the politician may choose to see or to instruct. As professionals, we owe that duty. We owe that loyalty as public administrators to the laws that govern our job and to the oath that we take when we go to the GG, agreeing to serve, to respect laws and institutions.
Absolutely. This was a very enlightening conversation, and I felt you gentlemen did our panel, did our viewers and listeners and myself. I learned a lot in respect of the functioning of the administrative state. Again, this was very dispassionate, and as much as I wanted more balance with the likes of Cassandra or Dave Ned here, I felt that you gentlemen really did justice to the conversation at hand. So now I will go over to you for closing comments. Mr. Douglas, I will start with you.
What I would like to close with is that people need to realize that the issue here is a matter of corruption, public corruption, and how do we deal with it? There are a lot of reports that are going around and estimates of what public corruption costs. $2.6 trillion around the world annually. That's just 2022. So 23, most likely it's more than that. And if you can just visualize what that amount of money would have done to the world, you know, what benefits the world would have received from just having that.
I think we lost you there for a second. I'll bring you back, Mr. Douglas. Go ahead, Mr. Douglas. Sorry, we lost you there for a second. Go ahead, please.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, you were saying recently. Go ahead, yes.
Right, recently, as last week, Uganda arrested, the president of Uganda had a number of the members of its government arrested, and they estimated about 40% of the budget in Uganda goes to corruption. Now, we in Grenada, as Mr. Lansing mentioned, he suggests that there might have been about a 5% loss on the revenue to corruption. Transparency International and other groups are saying similar for small countries, small to 5 to 10%. If you look at our budget and you think what 5% is, minimum 5%, we're looking at over $50 million. And you have to think about what are we losing for that? Schools, police station, hospitals, a lot of things, roads that cannot get service because of the corruption that is in Grenada. And it's there, it's endemic in every society throughout the world. We need to set up the right system to prevent that from happening. We are too small a country, too vulnerable for us to be continuing this way. And I'm strongly advocating that we have an independent body there that would mitigate that as much as possible so that the nation would get the benefits of that. Corruption is like a real cancer. If you ignore it or you don't treat it, it's going to grow. And the question is, how do you survive with that? So I'm imploring those in power to do something, because whether it's conflict of interest or the appearance of conflict of interest, we need to give the public an assurance. We need that matters, the allegations that are made be investigated, so people would be either cleared or they would get the facts of what really happened. So we need to have to set that up. We need the transparent process, and we need to have that information public. That's my 2 cents. Thank you.
A very apt 2 cents there, sir. Mr. Thomas, over to you, sir, for some closing comments.
Well, what I have to say, Dr. Bob, is that I believe that we need to keep the debate on governance going on, because the principal beneficiaries of good governance are the people of Grenada. So we need to emphasize that trusteeship aspect of governance. and to let those in authority know that you are guardians of the assets of the state. You are not there to dictate. And from that point, I believe we need really to get that message across, that morality in public life is important. We need to promote a system of values. I mean, recently I listened to a clip from the Prime Minister of Singapore, and he's saying that we need to have a clean system. I believe we need to have a clean system in Grenada too, and the media has a major role to play in this. So I would say let us continue this debate on governance and to reinforce the trusteeship aspect of governance. That I believe is very important.
And Mr. Thomas, rest assured, I will be inviting you back whenever we're having those conversations, because when I was discussing with my producer this week, one of the best people in Grenada who can speak to issues of governance, your name was at the very top of the list. So we'll be inviting you back to comment on those issues, irrespective of which administration, again, is entrusted with the people's business, as you like to say. So thank you again, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And of course, Mr. Duncan, before we get to closing comments, sir, just one CBI-related matter. Can we talk about the repayment? How is that going in respect of the settlement for the Kawana Bay project in respect of those investors? Where are we with that?
Okay, so Kelon, that is outside the ambit of the CBI committee.
Okay.
Yeah, that's not in our ambit. That's between the government of Grenada, who has acquired the property, if you recall, as part of the settlement arrangements, and they are working on that. Yeah.
So that would be a question for, I suppose, the Ministry of Finance or
and the Attorney General
Legal Affairs and the Attorney General's chambers as well.
Yeah.
Madam Attorney General, I will be coming to you this week, Madam, for some follow-up questions there in relation to that issue. All right, Mr. Duncan, over to you for some closing comments, sir.
But just as a footnote, what I could tell you is that the substitute developers are working assiduously to recalibrate the project, and then we will come back in as the CBI Investment Migration Agency to continue driving the investment needed to finish, the redesign or the modified design tweaked, Kawana Bay project, which will obviously have a different name, but that's how people know it as. Yeah, so we are standing ready to do that. In terms of
thank you for that.
So in terms of closing remarks, I do agree with former Prime Minister Tillman Thomas that governance is critical. When governance fails, bad things happen. Very bad things happen whenever governance fails, and we are replete with examples of those. The second point I want to make is that the tone at the top matters. It is inconsequential what you have in the very constitution, in the laws, in the regulations, and that kind of stuff. The tone at the top matters. And that's where people take their cue from. The third point I want to make is that we have, to my mind, a 2015 Modern Public Finance Management Act, 2015 very modern Public Finance Management Regulations. And I just want to quote Section 7 of the regulations, caption duty of diligence and honesty. And what it says, the following public officers shall, with diligence and honesty, discharge his or her responsibilities in the exercise of his or her powers under the Act and every other enactment. And they list the public officers who have those powers in law and regulation to do things that would result in the effective defense of the public purse or the public assets. And my plea and my call is that these people be trained to exercise the powers vested to them in law and regulations so that the public purse can be defended. As a matter of fact, to my mind, without the dereliction, given the dereliction of duties by public officers, either due to lack of capacity, incompetence, or simply collusion with the politician, That accounts, to my mind, for the pervasiveness of corruption in Grenada and globally. Unless these people who are paid by the very taxpayers come to the party and do their jobs, we will continue to fail the taxpayers year in, year out. That's my plea. Thank you for having me on the program.
It's always a pleasure, Brother Richard, to have you here, sir. You do bring some experience and knowledge to the table when you do come here. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Viewers and listeners, Mr. Douglas as well saying thank you there. Mr. Tillman Thomas. Mr. Tillman Thomas, your first time on the Bub Report. We hope to have you back again, as I said before. But it's a pleasure having a former journalist, because you are a former journalist, Mr. Thomas.
It's a pleasure.
On the program. Absolutely. Viewers and listeners, thank you as well for your comments. Unfortunately, we were not able to get to all of the comments, but I trust that this program really brought to you a sense of how government works in relation to the reduction of public spending and how guardrails should work in the administrative state when things do go awry, as has been the case in this situation involving Mr. Scott, who agreed to pay the amount owed to the state in a letter that was written to the permanent secretary back in 2019. But the current administration is moving forward with the intention to enforce payment on that particular debt owed to the state of Grenada. Of course, on the other side of the ledger, Mr. Scott indicated that this is a distraction, and it takes away from some of those issues that the national community are concerned about at this time. So we do look forward to see how this is going to play out as we continue to watch that space. Next week, we'll be having a special program in which we'll be observing the 2-year anniversary of the administration of the National Democratic Congress in office. We'll give you an update in respect of who the guest or guests might be for that. So thank you all for your comments. Thank you all for your participation as always. Please remember to share this program so that other people can have an opportunity to be enlightened by what was discussed today. I am your humble host, Dr. Kellen Bubb, on behalf of my competent producer, Rian Charles, wishing everyone a pleasant week. Take care now. Bye-bye.